Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I know I've been recording a lot of booktube content, but that's the only content I really feel inspired to do recently and have the energy to do, so that's the content we're going with until I feel ready to record other kinds of content. But I do have a couple of ideas planned for other content when I'm ready to record that. As you can tell from the title of this video, I read 3 of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books, 3 of her most popular books that have been going on BookTok, BookTube, Bookstagram, any bookish platform on social media. These 3 books have been talked about: Malibu Rising, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo, and Daisy Jones and the Six. At first, I was going to talk about these in order of publication year, but I think I'm just going to talk about them in order of the way I read them, which is how I just presented the books. For the most part, I enjoyed them. They weren't bad books. They were really great books. I understand the hype behind them, and I'm just going to talk about my personal feelings on these books. I'm going to be relying on my A Clockwork Reader reading journal, So first up, I'm going to talk about Malibu Rising. I gave this a 3.75 stars out of 5 stars. I did enjoy this. It was an okay read for me. It just wasn't one of my favorite books ever. It wasn't even my favorite book for these 3 books that I read. Malibu Rising is in 3rd place for me. And it's really interesting because in my review for Daisy Jones and the Six, which I finished the day I'm recording this, I talked a little bit about like the order I read these in and how that kind of lined up with my least to most favorite, which you can probably guess just by how I set this video up at this point. As I've said, it was a good read, not my favorite. This book though did have my favorite opening pretty much out of all time, which is saying a lot for this opening. Malibu catches fire. It's simply what Malibu does from time to time. Tornadoes take the flatlands of the Midwest, floods rise in the American South, hurricanes rage against the Gulf of Mexico, and California burns. That was honestly, like, first off, one of my favorite quotes in the book, and second off, just my favorite opening, as I said, pretty much of all the books I've read. I do think that this is a good read if you want to get a good feel for what California is like. But the thing to remember with California, across all of these 3 books, they're all set in California, and it all focuses on like the Hollywood aspect of California. First off, that's not all there is to California. And second off, especially if you're in Southern California, which is where I live, the locals are just used to it. Like, it doesn't seem glamorous to us, which is why, like, let's say for comparison, if you're from New York or the New York area, New York City or the surrounding area, New York City doesn't seem all that glamorous to you, but for someone from like LA, the West Coast, New York seems more glamorous. So that's like a really good comparison on how to think of it. As I've said, I'm from Southern California, kind of the area of this book and the area of all 3 of these books. And when I've gotten out of California, when I've gone to Washington DC or gone to Nova Scotia, Canada, I've gotten asked like, what's it like living near Hollywood? Like I never know how to answer because it's such a normal thing for me, like knowing that Hollywood is like 15 to 20 minute drive on a good day with very little traffic. It's normal for me. I think all of these books are really good representations of California and how Southern California, especially locals of that area, see a lot of these major sites. But with Malibu Rising, like for me, aside from that first quote, there was nothing really memorable about it for me. And maybe that's just because I live near Malibu, so it's like there's nothing really memorable about this book. It's a good story. The characters were likable, but they didn't really leave a lasting impression on me. So that's why this book was like good, but it wasn't necessarily great or fantastic in my opinion. Now, let's talk about The 7 Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo. I think the modern timeline of this book is set in Massachusetts, I believe, but you do get a lot of Hollywood in this when Evelyn is telling her story to Monique. This book is number 2 on this list. Malibu Rising is number 3, which obviously leaves Daisy Jones and the Six as number 1. But with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo, I just found this story way more interesting than Malibu Rising, just because like you do get the more Hollywood Hollywood glamour situation from this book. And touching upon what I talked about a little bit in Malibu Rising, you do get a little bit of like that Hollywood glamour, and that is something that Southern Californians are used to, but like having something on this scale is something that no one, not even Southern Californians, are immune to. Like the Hollywood scandals, not even locals are immune to like being interested in this. So I was really happy with this book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 stars. It didn't blow me out of the water. Again, probably because I'm a local, so it was just like, okay, yeah, I can picture everything really clearly. I know exactly what certain things look like for the most part, and it was definitely a fun read. I really enjoyed all the representation you get in this book. Having BIPOC center stage characters and having LGBTQ plus center stage characters was really nice representation. And the quote that stuck out for me in this book was when Evelyn was talking about Don Adler, and she says, "But I was tiring of him. What's that saying? Behind every gorgeous woman, there's a man sick of screwing her. Well, it works both ways. No one mentions that part." I thought that really was so well written, because it's true, no one talks about how, like, yeah, men can get sick of screwing women, but no one talks about how women can get tired of screwing a certain man. Like, yeah, let's talk about this both ways. So overall, I really enjoyed this. This is a 4-star read for me, and I definitely had a good time with it. Last but not least, Daisy Jones and the Six. I actually finished reading this the day I'm recording this, on August 1st, and this was my favorite out of all 3 books. I think the story just kind of hit me a little bit harder. I didn't really relate to a lot of the situations going on in this book, but I just felt this was just a more impactful story, in my opinion, that really just hit me, and I had such a fun time with this book, and everything in this book just built up so well. I was actually a little bit nervous about the setup of this book, because it's basically as an interview and there are no actual chapters. There are set defined sections of like the timelines, like Aurora 1977 to 1978, so like specific years or sets of years as sections, but there's no like defined chapters, which bothered me throughout this book, but it obviously didn't matter that much in the end for me. I wish there were set chapters. It would have helped pacing wise, for me at least, but as I said, not that big of a deal. If I could give more than 5 stars, I'm not entirely sure if I would. Maybe 5.5, 6 stars at most, but it was definitely a solid 5-star read for me. My favorite quote from this was from Karen, one of the members of the Six, and she said, "Men often think they deserve a sticker for treating women like people," and I just think that was so profound, especially considering what's going on right now in the US for women's rights. That was just so profound, and I think I ended up picking this up at the perfect time given what's going on with women's rights. As I said, I absolutely love this book, and this was number 1 out of all 3 of these books. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So those were my thoughts on Daisy Jones and the Six, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I do recommend giving these all a read at some point if you haven't read them already, or at least reread them to refresh your memory on these books. With all that said, I want to talk a little bit about what's on my currently reading pile. First up is A Touch of Darkness, the first book in the Hades and Persephone retelling by Scarlett Sinclair. I'm really enjoying this so far, even though I'm not that far in. I'm 45 pages in. I started listening to this as an audiobook, but I've been in this weird reading funk of sorts, partial reading funk, where the past couple of audiobooks that I had started before this one through the Scribd app, I ended up sitting down and just starting a new one, and I was really interested in the stories, but I guess I'm just not in the right mindset for audiobooks right now. I don't know. Second up, or maybe even third up, because this can be counted as 2 in 1, is Lord of the Rings. And the reason why I say it can be counted as 2-in-1 is because you can count it as The Fellowship of the Ring, which I'm reading, and you can also count it as Lord of the Rings as a whole, since this is how Tolkien originally intended to. I am counting this as 2 reads because I'm counting it as Fellowship of the Ring and Lord of the Rings on Goodreads and Storygraph. My family and I are reading this together over Zoom every 2 weeks, so it's going to take us a while to finish the whole book. And lastly, as an ebook, I'm reading Apollo, the second book in the Contemporary Mythos series by Carly Spade. I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm 3 chapters in, and so far it's pretty good. Apollo is exactly how I would imagine him, especially the little bit we got in the first book, Hades. A little pro tip: if you use Kindle Unlimited like I do, that's how I'm reading this series. This tip has been going around on Book Talk lately, but I want to mention it here too. As I said, if you're using Kindle Unlimited, the authors get paid via Kindle Unlimited per page swipe. So you can start from the cover, just keep swiping, because the more you swipe every page, the more they get paid. So start off from the cover and go to the end. Don't like skip to a chapter. Like, even if you don't enjoy the book, like, at least appreciate that the author put time and effort into the book. That's all for this video. As usual, my socials, Bookstagram, Book Talk, Goodreads, Storygraph, and my Mercari and Pengo books are all linked down below in the description, so go check those out. Thank you all for watching, and see you all in next week's video.